things and are passionate about lots of things to share their passions and their expertise. And it's so nice to see lots of faces from all over. Tonight we have the privilege of having Alvyn, who is an architect with many years of experience, who's designed many amazing buildings around. And he's going to share tonight on values-based architecture. So on Zoom, we just do a little clap, little wave of the hands clap to welcome him. So welcome, Alvyn. I'll pass it over to you. And I'm going to mute everyone just so until questions, or if anyone would like to be unmuted because of a question, just like go like this and I can unmute you.
All good?
Yeah, right. Yep, cool. Yep, all good.
Thanks, Rachel. I am going to share my screen now. And can someone tell me if you can see me once I share my screen? I'm going to do that and go to slideshow.
Yeah, we can see you, Alvyn.
Okay, just checking, because I've never done a Zoom presentation before with more than just like 1 or 2 people. So, okay, I want it to stop. All right, I'm ready. I'd like to start just with a short acknowledgement. I'm in a different country to you. I'm in Wadawurrung country. And so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country and of your country as well, up there in Wurundjeri land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past and present, and to also any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. I'll just very quickly talk about myself. I'm an architect. I've had an office, I'd say my own office, for just over 20 years. And over that time have developed a way of working and a methodology for how I work, where I, instead of sort of having, architects usually have an aesthetic idea or something they want to create. I have this way of working where I try to ask questions of clients and listen to clients and actually put something together based on what they want and what their needs are. So a little bit different to the way we're trained to be architects. I'm not going to show you lots and lots of fantastic images today of beautiful buildings. What I'm going to talk about is values-based architecture and why at this point in time in the world where we're all very acutely aware of our disconnection from nature and the consequences of that. Just why we need to start creating more regenerative environments. A lot of the presentation I'm going to give tonight is sourced from an article that I've put together recently with a friend, Xavier Cadarel from Melbourne University. And it was like a series of interviews where we've put together some questions and some answers about consumption and really challenging the question of consumption and how that relates to architecture. Can everybody see that slide okay?
Yep.
Yeah. We exist at a particular point in humanity's journey where our disconnection from nature has become very apparent. It's not just on, and the kind of general conversation is about carbon dioxide, but there's so many deeper levels that our disconnection from nature is becoming really apparent. We've got the environmental issues, and they happen on a carbon dioxide level and global warming level. There's also extinction of species and pollution and many other things. We've got social issues with inequality and social injustice. We've got a real completely disparate group of people in the world who are becoming obscenely wealthy compared to the rest of the world's inhabitants. We've got a situation where through use of technology, ironic, which is what we're all benefiting from right now, we're becoming less and less embodied and less in our bodies and in our bodies in nature. And so all of that disconnection that we're experiencing is actually intensified by the technology that we're choosing to use. And for some people, there is a sense of grief already emerging about this awareness that the world that we grew up in isn't necessarily going to be the world that we leave our children. Monica talked about this in an earlier session about the concept of trauma and about the concept. I don't know if anybody remembers seeing her presentation. She showed a diagram of a comfort zone and then the different states of being outside that comfort zone. And really the relationship that we've created with the environment is in many situations putting humans into a state of trauma at the moment. And so we really need to adjust our relationship with the environment to and start to take on board some of the things that Monica was saying about groundedness and about mindfulness and about how you actually bring yourself out of that the freeze or the paralysis state, or how you bring yourself back down from the fight or flight state. There's not a lot of help with where we are from the various institutions that we've entrusted to take care of us and guide us, from governments to every level of organisation. The governments create regulations, but it's almost as if business exists to break regulations. We even see now our government, the British government and the American government are led by people who are actively playing off regulation and saying that's a bad thing and that we should be freeing up regulations. It's not going so well for America right now, but it's definitely not going well for the environment, and it's definitely not going well for most people. Even the magazines and a lot of the organisations that work in the area of sustainability or in the green areas are still portraying a world that has got so much consumption in it and so much use of resources and energy to maintain that they're complicit in the just the out of control nature of our community. There's no part of humanity more out of control than business and economics. This is the Juukan Gorge, if anyone recognises the picture, recently destroyed by Rio Tinto. At the same time, we have architects talking about this beautiful concept of touching the earth lightly, using steel structures that might only have one or two posts that touch the ground, but with absolutely no awareness of where steel comes from and the damage to the environment created by steel. And all the time through industries that are pushing for less and less regulation. Another example is if you buy taps and door handles made of chrome. For a lot of the chrome that you can purchase, particularly lower value, so a lot of the handles and taps you purchase made of chrome, the type of chrome that's deposited on the taps leaves the workers with about 20 years of lifespan from the day they start working in those chrome plants. And most consumers in Western countries are completely disconnected from that. It's really a grand case of valuing money before people. When we wrote this article a week or two ago, we had to use the word sustainability, and we talked about the word sustainability and how it's really falling out of favour in the academic community at the moment. Some people have said it's such a low aim. They said if you say you wanted to have a relationship with somebody and you define that relationship as sustainable, you're completely falling short of any of the reasons why you would have a relationship. We've avoided all of that. No, don't you want a joyful relationship? Don't you want a loving one? Don't you want a warm one? Don't you want a caring one? Sharing one? There's so many bigger things we could be looking for, but it's almost like the whole industry's settled on the word sustainable. It's, not even that's too big an aim for some people. What does sustainability even mean? It's, there's a lot of argument about the definition of sustainability. There's the simple level is that your children and your grandchildren should be able to do the same as we do now. But I don't know if I want them to keep destroying the world at the speed that we're destroying the world. That's, to me, not necessarily a great definition of sustainability. You can look at sustainability and you can break it down, as the modern thinking does so well, and you can break it down into economic sustainability, or you can break it down into environmental sustainability or cultural sustainability. What that's really led me towards in my work is really looking at, well, why? What do we want to be sustainable? And it's very much led me into the really looking at culture and what people value, which has then led me to into the field of values-based architecture. Now, if I define that, all I'm really saying is that values-based architecture is when you actually generate the environment that people are going to live in using the things that they care about. So you ask people to think about what they care about, and then you use that to create an environment. When Paul gave a talk a few weeks ago, a month or two ago, he talked about psychedelic medicine and it breaking through all of the layers of trauma and disconnection that people have, and actually getting them back in touch with their values. And one of the things that's fascinated me is, well, where do values come from? And how do you actually make values, and how do you create them? And the profound thing is that what creates our values is the environment that we grow up in. That environment's the natural environment, but it's also the family environment and the cultural environment and the social environment and the political environment. And so to have a look at our values and whether our values are, well, firstly, whether they're okay or not, whether the things we care about are actually valid, but also whether we are on the same page. Some people may value different things to us. We need to have a much bigger understanding of our environment. This is quite significant. And Winston Churchill said many years ago he had to open some building, and he gave a beautiful speech about architecture. But one of the things he said that stuck in everyone's memories are that architects create environments and they shape environments, and thereafter the environments that they've created shape us. And what he was really alluding to is that, I don't even know that most people are aware of this, but the environments that architects create, sometimes that's the entire existence of people, actually it affects the sort of people that they can be. The Steiner movement's very big on this. They've done a lot of work in Steiner schools over the years, and they've been very conscious of the way, particularly in an educational environment, that the building and the environment actually shape people. And so they've had a very measured approach to doing that. I was incredibly lucky as a student. I worked for an architect called Greg Burgess, a fairly well-known architect 20 years ago, less well-known now. And one of the most amazing things about Greg was his humanity. And one of the projects he did was this one. I don't know if anyone's been there, the Cultural Centre at Uluru. And Greg went and he sat down in the sand with the Aboriginal people, the Pitjantjatjara and the Anagu. And he just listened to their stories and listened to what they cared about for weeks. I think it was almost a month. And then he generated the building design for their cultural centre from what was important to them. It was an absolutely unique thing in Indigenous architecture. No one had ever done this in Australia before. No one had ever sat and listened to Aboriginal people and then responded to what they wanted and what was important to them. It's an incredible example of, and again, it reminds me when you go to the Northern Territory, there's just examples everywhere of how much Western civilization has taken and not given anything back in return. And this is one of the few examples of where something's being given back in return to the Indigenous people and to the country. It brings me to consumption. I don't know how many of you know this, but by the 12th of January this year, the average English person had used the same amount of carbon dioxide by the 12th of January as about half of the countries in Africa. So the average inhabitant of the UK had used the same amount of carbon dioxide as the average inhabitant of Africa uses in a whole year. English use about 8.3 tonnes per person. The Australians use 17 tonnes per person per year. So by the 6th of January, we'd use as much, or create as much carbon dioxide as many people create in the whole year. There's a incredible scale thing that comes through affluence, and we're a very affluent country. Even in a country like Australia, we consume, some people have said, 200 times as much as our grandparents did 100 years ago. And there's not a lot of sign of that changing. COVID has put a slight halt on that in some ways, but it's made it worse in other ways. You know, who would have thought that there would be no planes in the sky in 2020? And technology, some people see, and some people are very obsessed with the idea that technology is going to solve it all for us, and that technology will be the solution. If I go back to the 1950s, the German philosopher Heidegger said technology just helps us destroy nature faster. It's actually even comes back from earlier in the Industrial Revolution. It's known as the Jevons Paradox from about the 1860s. And Jevons said that as we increase technological efficiency, our consumption of materials and energy nevertheless increase. It's partly due to population, but it's also due to us adjusting our idea of what our needs are. There's another way that we can think, and one of the pioneers of different thinking has been David Holmgren. I'm not sure how many of you have come across his book Retro Suburbia, where he looks at using the things that are already in our environment to create a future for us that gives us everything we need without consuming more resources. Similarly, this image is from an architect called Samuel Mockbee, who runs or he did run, he's passed away now, an architectural design school in Alabama, often where wealthy architecture students would build houses for African Americans who'd never had a house in their whole life, sometimes for generations. Recycling all of the materials that are thrown away by the rest of society. And what I am very aware of is that, you know, as parts of the suburban environment, because they're so fragile to shocks of water or energy or employment or food, all that sort of thing, as they become abandoned and moved away from, and it's happened in parts of Europe and happened in parts of the United States already, they will become stockpiles of materials and resources that will be able to be reused over and over again in the future. What values-based architecture really comes back to, one of the core ideas is the idea of care. And care is about our relationship with time. And one of the stories I like telling is from Michael Leunig, where he explains that if you want to create time, then you start a project that will take time. And in doing that, you create time. And traditional cultures have had a much healthier relationship with this. And I really like the idea, the wabi-sabi idea from Japan, where if you take care with things and you understand the character of things and the character of materials, and you value them very thoroughly, that value that you place on, that reverence, actually becomes embodied in the objects that you're using and the things that you work with. It's a very different way of looking at things to our new culture, where everything's got to be new and everything's got to be youthful, and we're continually using, you know, fresh resources from everywhere. Another thing that's really important is that it's what you're doing isn't so important. It's who you're being as you do what you do. And what we've found with values-based architecture is that by creating a conversation about people's values, you can remind them of their values as we go through a design process. So we're creating an environment where people's values actually become supported by the environment that they're going to live in the future. And so as you hit roadblocks in the way of making decisions on the way through a project, you can actually go back and say, well, we've talked about this. We've talked about, has anything changed? You know, do you care about different things now to what you cared about at the start of a project? And so what that process is, it's almost like a circle where you come back, clients come back and they say, okay, who are we and what's important to us? And as that happens through the course of a project, and particularly once you start building, those situations get thrown up all the time. But clients, and I watch them over and over again, get better and better at coming back in that circle. Who are we? What do we care about? What do we know about ourselves more than when we started this project? And then that enables them to move through decision making and move through blockages much faster. Xavier asked me, one of the questions he asked me is, what am I trying to change? And what am I trying to change about the world? And it's a massive question, because on the outside, everything has to change and everything will change. But one of the things that it throws me back to is that the first place for change is in yourself. You know, is the way that I'm living coherent with what I care about? Does the way that I work support that? Am I spending the time with my family that I say that I care about and I say that I want to do? And am I actually living the life that I want to live? And through, we can turn that back on ourselves, just as we can take clients through processes to do that for themselves. And over the last 20 years, it's allowed me to completely adjust the way that the office works and the way that we work, which has been quite an amazing process and not all easy. I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to actually take questions from people. But firstly, I would just like to thank Rach and Ollie for this opportunity to speak to you. I'd like to thank Pierre for supporting me. I'd like to thank Xavier for the work that he's done with this article, and hopefully we get to see that in print before too long. And I'm going to open up now to questions.
Cool. I'll unmute everyone.
Hey, Alvyn, I can.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi. So, being a renter, as I know we've had lots of conversations about how you live in rental spaces and how we think about our footprint as renters, and also how we can apply some of these principles living in rented spaces, because we know that we're not creating something that's permanent. There's always a transience, and so part of that, I think it's the psychology behind renting, is that you often think, well, I put the energy and the effort into creating homes that I ideally want because I know I'll be moving on in some time. So what advice would you give to renters with how we think about our living space and how we do create a space that reflects our values and really brings us that sort of joy in the space that we live in?
Thanks, Nikki. It's a good question, because there's two different ways that I would answer it. And the first one is that you can really look at the things that you have power over changing, and the things that you are able to do, not as a property owner. And they're all of the things that you have in your house. There's, whether you're using recycled things or whether you just have a constant flow of new things. What's your quantity of consumption? You don't have to have solar panels on your roof. You can buy carbon neutral power through one of the power companies. So you can minimize your consumption of resource and that sort of thing. You can fit out a building that you're living in to be coherent with your values. One of the other ways to look at it, though, is that if you were in the house that you're renting now forever, so say that the world changed and that was it, that's where you're going to be, what would you do differently if you knew you were going to be there forever? And if that's the case, what's stopping you doing that now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm doing a lot of the things that I want to do to create a great living space. For me, the main value is close connection to nature. And I think that's, I've been having lots of conversations through this pandemic, and we've all been finding a lot of solace in nature. So for me, the location is actually the most important thing, and easy access to nature. So being right on the Mary Creek. Yeah, but other than that, I don't think there's the way I can knock out walls in the flat here at the moment. But yeah, I do find it's the little touches, and yeah, bringing the outside in one works for me.
Hi, Alvyn. Tonya here. I'm a
Was there an
interior
open question?
designer. I was just wondering, what do you think about the sustainability ratings and certifications like Green Star or a LEED or BREEAM? And do you use any of them?
I use some of them and not others. So the first question is, what do I think of them? And on the whole, most of them are a benefit. One of my favorites is the Living Building Challenge. It's a bit more holistic than some of the others.
Is that the same as the Livable Housing Guidelines, or is that? No,
different again. I can't remember who wrote the book and started that, but if you look up Living Building Challenge, you'll find that. It's got a lot more detailed relationships between people and everything else. If we look at the other extreme, we've got in Australia our 6-star system, which is just about what the house is made from on the outside. Not about not even about how much energy it takes to build that. Nothing to do with how much energy it takes to manage the house, nothing to do with the lifestyle of the people who live inside a building. Yeah, so it's a very, very weak standard. If we look at, say, certification in relationship to forestry, we've got a tension between certification organisations who would like to get more people under the umbrella so that there's not people selling illegal timber around the place. But on the other hand, a lot of them are under pressure to weaken their level of regulation to get more people under that umbrella. An example of that's the FSC, the Forestry Stewardship Council. The Victorian government tried to get our forests in Victoria under that certification many years ago, but because of the structure they'd set up with the forestry organisation, and there might be someone here who knows a lot more than I do about this, but they set up a particular legal structure with Vic Forests that then didn't allow that to happen. So we have in the news last week, Bunnings won't sell Victorian timber anymore.
Cool. Alvyn, I have, because Pia doesn't have a microphone, she's written a question.
I can see.
Yeah, okay, good. Just making sure you got that one.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Pia. So an example of how values-based design, where a client's values has actually gone on to inform or challenge the way they've chosen to build. I'm just trying to think of one that's relevant. So I can give you I'll give you two. The first one is an example of a project that hasn't gone ahead. And so we did some work, Andrew Ladle and I did some work with the Queenscliff Council 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, to design a botanic gardens and an eco centre for Queenscliff. The eco centre was going to be this fantastic building that all of the various environment groups that have no funding in the borough of Queenscliff would then have a home and somewhere that they could actually gather and have meetings and do the things that environment groups do. When we started the project, we said, has anyone ever done an assessment of, you're looking at this environmental structure to have this particular aim for all these environment groups. Has anyone done an assessment of the building stock the council own already to see if there's any spaces that would be suitable before you build something new? Because the most sustainable approach would be not to build a building at all. And when they did that, they discovered that they had something like 25% of spaces underutilized, and they could fit all those environment groups into other spaces. Now, that we didn't get a job at the end of that whole process. they got to spend some money on the Botanic Gardens design, and they moved all these environment groups into these underutilized spaces, which actually fulfilled the requirements and the values of those groups much more than, you know, a big new multi-million-dollar eco center would have done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another example of that where a project has gone ahead is occasionally I have a client who, right at the start of the design process, when we're asking them questions in our pre-design meetings and putting together a design brief, this client said they want to show other people an example of what you can do if you want to live sustainably. And so then as that project went on, and what they got really attached to in the process was to design a very small house and to build a very small house. And that was then constantly reinforced, excuse me, through the design process, where all of these opportunities for making a bigger house came up, but at every scenario it was focused back on this tiny little house. Ended up being about 55 square meters in total. Any more questions?
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Eloise. We also live in an apartment that we are paying off. And my question is about, I love that quote, the Tolstoy quote. But when you sort of start to make the shifts in your own life, especially when you're living in a not selected community like an apartment building of 20 dwellings, and you're not all on the same page, how do you then suggest to just widen the circle of your values-based architecture principles within your building and your community, in communities that are not necessarily sharing similar values to you? And do you have any ideas about, I know there are some extraordinary communities in Melbourne that are built around similar values, the Hood being one of them. And often Said says to me it's very destructive to try to build community with people who don't want to build community, but to just share those values in a non-acrimonious way, or a non-pressured way, or not a righteous way, but wanting to be a little louder than quietly powering your apartment in a way that you see fit, or quietly fitting out your apartment, or quietly building a community garden. Or was interested in how you see high density living and widening the circle of consciousness in communities that aren't sharing the same values.
Good question. Yeah. So I think it's much harder to live sustainably in high density and apartment living. One of the main reasons for that is there's a whole lot of things that you're locked into doing. Lifts, the materials, the water, the power, how sustainable the building envelope is. You're locked into doing that really with very little opportunity to do anything to change it. Body corporates are infamously reluctant to spend money because it's everybody's money who owns the apartment. I was talking with a fellow today who manages the body corporate for a block of flats in Gertrude Street. And he was saying, they've got a particular design for this building. It's not that attractive, but it's also suffering a lot of vandalism. And so he was wondering whether he could direct some of the funds that they have to spend, which is an absolute fortune every year, on fixing vandalism, spray painting and breaking things and graffiti, whether that would be better directed to green roofs and green walls and planting that actually created, a bit more sense of being cared for in the building, and then also had environmental benefits as well. So there are things you can do. I think if you take a step back, and the research on values says that we don't all have different values. We all have the same values, almost exactly the same across human culture, but what we do is we prioritize our values differently. And so most of us do care about the environment, and we care on a scale of, we need air to breathe, or we're going to spend $1 billion on making a better environment for our family to live in. But there's still care there. And David Suzuki says it's important to find the common ground. So if you can't find common ground on issues that are important for you, then you're in the wrong place and you're in the wrong community.
It's tricky though. Sometimes I think high density living is really, with our extraordinary population growth, building sustainable high density populations is really going to be much less taxing on ecosystems and biodiversity loss, because isn't the urban spread the one thing in Australia, I think, that is one of the greatest threats to biodiversity loss, is everybody's feeling that they have a right to at least 600 to 800 square metres of land to do with as their values see fit. And yeah, it's an interesting area, I think, of high density living and how to reframe our values or restructure them. Or...
Yeah, and the problem with it is if high density living locks us into a consumption of 5 worlds per year worth of resources, then the high density living isn't the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you maybe can look for examples of high density living in places that consume less than 1 world worth of resources. Yeah, and I think as well is architects and planners are very seduced by the idea that the only way forwards is urbanity and high density. And traditionally, the history of human civilization, that hasn't gone well virtually every time. And what has been strong is rural-based communities up to limited sizes where people have a relationship with agriculture and food and water.
Thanks, Alvyn. If I ask another question, I guess that goes along the same line of high density, and maybe not so much in Australia, but if you think globally, there are many places, especially in Asia, for example, where there's people living in huge buildings. Increasingly, I think I also coincidentally watched something just last night that said China has used in 3 years has used more cement than US has used in 100 years. But in the same time, it showed the second tallest building in the world that is built in China at the moment, and it showed that it's basically a very efficient building that is all of the energy is produced in the building itself, and that it described quite a bit about it, which I don't understand all, but it looked like that is the way of the future. Is that what you think, or is that too probably too difficult?
I personally believe that technology isn't going to get us out of this one. That it's always tantalizingly there as an idea that someone will develop the technology that allows consumption to reduce. But it hasn't, in the last 200 years, that hasn't really worked, and it hasn't been borne out. In fact, consumption's actually accelerated through every growth of technology. One of the reasons why China has the population it does and is the powerhouse that it is was the Green Revolution, which happened long before before Mao and the People's Revolution, and it was an agricultural revolution that happened that allowed people to have an individual relationship with land. The Transition Handbook is a great example of this. It shows that when one person and one family have a relationship with almost a tiny piece of land, the amount of food and products that can be produced is phenomenal, and much more in excess, or much greater than industrial agriculture can produce for vast amounts of land. And the United Nations reflect that. They say that small-scale farming is the only way forwards for humanity that's sustainable.
Alvyn, I was wondering if you've got anything to say in terms of the does values-based architecture dovetail into the idea of an architect as an advocate, or in some sense as a community builder or a community worker in some fashion?
Thanks, Raku. Architects, through their training, on the whole, any architects listening, put your hand up. You can tell me whether you agree with me or not. On the whole, architects are trained to, they're trained as designers, and they're trained through quite an adversarial teaching process where you have to defend the work that you put on the wall. What that does is it creates a group of professionals who aren't very good at listening and are very good at arguing, and can be very defensive over the things that they're doing. And we, like, say an architect like Tony Fry, who's an academic, you know him well, I think, based in Launceston, he would say that there's 4 types of architect that exist in the world at the moment. The first type is just trying to make it big in the mainstream, become the next Renzo Piano or Richard Rogers or Frank Gehry. They just want to be famous and they want to do big stuff. Most architecture courses are training that type of architect. The next kind of architect believes in an idea. I'm saying architect, this applies to lots of other professions as well, but they believe in the idea that what they're going to do is going to make a change in the world, whether it's sustainability or whether it's something else. And but they do that within the framework of what they've been taught and what the culture will allow to happen easily. And what Tony Fry argues with that type of architect is they're actually deluded, because the scale of the damage that we've caused to the world is never going to be addressed by such small measures. And unfortunately, if I look at, if you just bring it back to that idea of eco footprint, if we're consuming 5 worlds worth of resources, most sustainable architecture, or what we call sustainable architecture in Australia, will only bring us back to 4. And anything less than that, people aren't interested in. Clients don't want to talk about it because it might hurt, and it might mean that they have to actually have a lower standard of living than they think they should have. There's a couple of other, I can't remember the other categories, but he also has another category of architect, which is at the other end of his scale, where you're like an outsider who challenges everything. And I don't think I'm necessarily that one, but he sort of gives this scale of where you sit in relation to the training that you've had. Yeah.
Alvyn, what's been the most inspiring project for you that you've been involved with, and why?
Sorry, I missed that. It was a bit blurry. What did you say?
I said, what's been the most inspiring project for you that you've been a part of, and why?
So I think one of the most inspiring projects was the Cultural Centre at Uluru. And just the level of ground still is quite phenomenal. So the wall made from sand from the side of the road on the way to Uluru. we've lost Rachel. Oh, there you are.
Someone's asked here, Pia, is there any example in Australia that does high density living well? I know there's a...
Sorry, I don't know if I can unmute you, Eloise.
Sorry.
I heard half of that.
Chatting away to myself. Pia asked if there are any examples in Australia that do high density living. I remember, I think it's the Climate for Change video at their Climate Conversations presentation talks about briefly this building in Brazil, which has a sort of a forest growing in the middle of the city. I think it's Rio de Janeiro, so some extraordinary building. Yeah, but I wonder if there's anything here in Australia that we could look to. I know it's probably not the answer, but if there is some way of greening what we already have, or some way of affecting policy, that's another interesting question I'd like to ask. Do you see in your power, in your role, and in your values, how someone like you or people like us can affect policy, which seems to be such a deciding factor on what we all agree on that we value in society?
Okay, so I'll go to the first question, the first part of that first. Is there any examples of doing it well? It really depends on how you define well. And so the word well is a big word. Is well to do with sustainability, is well to do with social connection, is it to do with connection to nature? There's a lot of different parts of that.
Maybe all of those.
And and there'll be some that do some of those well, and there'll be some that do some of those less well. You know? One of my favourite sets of apartments in Melbourne is the Cairo apartments, and what they did really well. I don't even know. Maybe they're from the 30s or something. They're quite old. Is that they're tiny. And then they also had a communal space as part of the project right from the start. And so for me, that's an example, and it's a bit of a shining example of, we have all this conversation about, the quality of apartments and the size of apartments. I think the Cairo apartments are 25 square meters each. And they're much more livable and enjoyable to live in than many contemporary apartments that meet the notional space requirements, because it's they have character, and they have a bit of elegance, and it's actually worth living there. Yeah, and the second part of that, and I think it goes to Raku's question as well, I think architects and professionals are very well placed to guide people. Why I say that is, I showed you pictures of magazines and things back at the start of the talk, and there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of greenwashing, and there's a lot of confusion. If I go to my local hardware store and buy a piece of timber, how do I know where it comes from, whether it's sustainable or not? I can't tell. Even as a professional, I get led up the garden path. No one can tell me the sawmill, no one can tell me the forest, no one can tell me who was involved in it. When it used to be Vic Ash, I knew enough about that because it was a local industry that I could say something about it. Now some of the pine that I get as framing is Baltic pine. It's got a stamp on it that says Austria, but Austria doesn't have enough timber to send it all around the world. So it's moving through Austria to get its FSC stamp and then ending up in Australia. So that architects are actually very well placed because of, it's the same with any professional who's doing something every day. We can actually become guides for other people through all of the pitfalls and all of the dangers. I can show you where you get real brass taps from that don't have chrome on. I can explain to you that the embodied energy of the marble tiles that get cut and sent from Turkey is actually less than the clay tiles that get made in Vietnam. And so there's all of these little bits of experience that an architect can take and can say to people, you know, what do you care about, and we can support you to actually do that.
Thank you.
If you've still got impetus to answer another question, I'd like to answer another one, Alvyn. Sorry, ask another one. I'm curious, you sort of started talking a bit about connection, embodied connection to place and the outside. And I was wondering if maybe you could bring it back there a bit in terms of how architecture relates to that. I guess something I've been thinking about through my journey as an architecture student is the aspiration to make inside spaces increasingly comfortable, generally in the name of sustainability, or as sort of lowest common denominator to make sure that no one uses too much air conditioning. In some ways that plays into this sort of paradox you're talking about a bit earlier, that the more technology you have and the more comfortable you get. It's a different paradox, but in this sort of scenario, I feel like it potentially encourages people not to follow through with their inherent value of connection to place. Like you say, everyone has these values, and if we want to support people to feel part of their community and not just part of their house, and to feel part of the environment that they exist within, is it important to have a Cairo apartment that's a bit too small, or maybe a place which gets a bit too cold in winter so you've got to go out to the pub, or maybe to think about discomfort as a positive?
Okay, I think I know where you're going with this. Now, there's a academic in Queensland, Dr. Paul Memmott, and he teaches a course called Aboriginal Environments. I studied with him a long time ago, 96, 94, something like that. And what he showed us, it was mind-blowing. He showed us the Indigenous architecture from all over Australia. He showed us the stone buildings in Western Australia, in South Australia, in Tasmania, in Victoria. He showed us all of the different types of timber buildings and cob buildings and earth roof buildings and green roof buildings. He showed us the multi-storey buildings in the northern part of Australia. And one of the things that was really important to him is he said that Indigenous people were very efficient in using the resources in their environment. And so they only built shelter in relation to what they needed shelter from. And he said almost ubiquitous across Australia from one end to the other was the first form of shelter, which was fire. And so architecturally, fire was the first structure that was created everywhere because of all of the benefits that it provided. In other parts of Australia, all you needed was a windbreak. So after a fire, shelter from wind and cold through wind was all that was necessary. And then in other parts of Australia, obviously sun and rain and different things. So there's parts of the Northern Territory, there's traditional shade structures. Tasmania has very warm, solid buildings as its traditional architecture. We can take that into today. We can take it right into where we are right now, where we're sitting, and say, what is it that we need shelter from where we are right now? It's different for every one of us. A client who would come to me with MS actually has to have a much more stable internal environment than most people do. Children need a much more stable internal environment. Some people need shelter from cold in a different way to others. Some places need shelter from mosquitoes more than they need shelter from cold. So right where we're sitting in all these different rooms all over the place, we actually all have different shelter needs that we can articulate. And that's very, very different to a lounge room, a dining room, a TV room, a laundry, master bedroom, and the very Australian way of looking at how do we need space. What do we need shelter from? In the Yarra Valley, you need shelter from fire. So everything that we design in the Yarra Valley, fire is this critical thing that we address. How are we going to shelter people inside this house from fire? And not just from, like a Black Saturday type of fire, but also from ember attack, from the risk of fire, from the disruption of having to evacuate. Where do their musical instruments go? Where does their photo album go?
Hi, I do have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hi, hello. I have a question. Good night, Alvyn. Thank you so much for the talk. You said at the beginning that the first question you do your clients is what do they care about? So I wonder what happened next. Like, where does that take you? How does that affect directly the project? Like, maybe affects the design itself, or maybe make the clients reassess their values and the nature of the project change altogether. I mean, what happens? It sounds like a naive question, I guess, but I'm very interested in the approach that you have based on listening. For me, that's the only way that you can actually design, but that's just me.
So that's a great question. Thank you. I don't ask a client, what do you care about?
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
I ask them lots of different questions.
Oh, no, I thought that was the first one you did.
I take note of what they care about.
Okay.
So I ask them the things that are important to them. I ask them the things that they love about the place they live or the culture they live in. I ask them the things that they complain about. I ask them, why are they taking on a project? What do they want to achieve when they take on a project? One of the exercises I do when I run workshops is I take people outside their house, out to the street, across the road. And I stand across the road and I say, here's a house. What do you know about this house and what these people care about from this side of the road? What can you see? Sometimes the house has got 3 cars in the driveway. Sometimes it's got a water tank in the front yard and solar panels on the roof. Sometimes it's got a vegetable garden spilling out onto the street. Other times it's perfectly mown lawn with clipped edges. And so you know a lot about what people care about just by listening and just by observing. And then the next question I'll ask people in the workshop, and I'll say, well, if there's something that this person cares about with this house, what would we change in this environment? What do we take away to reinforce the things that are important to these people? Or what could we add to reinforce that? It's the same with your question, Nikki. You could look at that as well. You could say, these are the things I care about. What has to be taken away from my flat to reinforce who I am and what I care about, and what would need to be added? A lot of renovation projects we work on, it's all about what you take away, and sometimes you're taking away layers and layers and layers of the improvements people have made to properties since it was first built. And then you actually get back to the really the dignity that the building had at the start, and then you have a clean slate to work with.
Thanks.
Alvyn, it's David Cameron here. Could I ask you a question that relates...
Hi, David.
How are you? Could I ask a question that relates to one of the things that was mentioned in the blurb about you and that you mentioned in passing early on? And you made some reference to, I think you've made reference to Steiner schools and the buildings associated with the anthroposophical movement. The reason I ask this is because we sent all our children to the first of these schools in Victoria, the Warrenwood School. And when all of our kids were there at one stage, I undertook I was part of a study group with one of the teachers who was himself an architect responsible for one phase of the construction of that whole campus. And so I was reading week by week a sequence of lectures by Rudolf Steiner on the subject of architecture. And of course, Steiner gave sequences of lectures on an enormous diversity of subjects. But one of the enduring impressions that one has of the anthroposophical movement is through its architectural designs. And of course, they come from roughly a century ago. And the best known buildings that people associate with Steiner himself are the buildings at Dornach, which happens to be a stone's throw from where I was born and grew up in Basel, northern Switzerland. And of course, the first building was a work in timber, which then was burnt down by arson, and then it was rebuilt in concrete. But most of the buildings built in that tradition have grown out of the earth, so to speak. They tend to try to emulate environments like caves or little prominences in the landscape. And so they have this enduring quality of seeming to emerge out of the ground itself. And the question I wanted to ask you after all of that introduction is that I'm wondering whether in your mind that impetus from Rudolf Steiner's work back in the early 20th century is still fit for purpose today, notwithstanding the fact that concrete, which is so often used, it's such an environmentally resource-hungry material. But do you think that it is still a whole framework that is fit for purpose today in those many schools and environments where all we've often done now is substitute Australian timbers for European timbers? We've substituted mud brick often for traditional bricks or concrete, but otherwise we've preserved a lot of those original intentions that you might think are now a century out of date, but seem to me to still be very much loved by the people who live in and study and attend a whole lot of community functions in those same buildings, such as in Steiner schools, but similar things like Greg Burgess's buildings in several places make me think that he was inspired by much the same thing. And we can't forget that the whole of the design of Canberra was modelled by two architects who were themselves highly inspired by the anthroposophical movement. The Burley Griffins, of course.
Yeah, okay. So just to clarify, your question is it still relevant? Is that right?
Yes, it is still fit for purpose 100 years later, because it is still being copied fairly faithfully by a group of people who adhere to those original instincts of trying to grow something as if it's a big mushroom that's grown out of the ground and has the kind of, it lacks the orthogonality of most modern civilizational structures and has something that I think is not unique, but it really is something that belongs with the earth in a way that most other architectural styles defy. You know, you look at the tallest buildings in, whether it's in Dubai or anywhere in the world, and we have plenty of them in Australia, they have absolutely, they don't even give a nod to nature in any way unless it's some sort of, you know, remarkably enlarged example of maybe some crystalline structure on some deep sea sponge, which is, you know, made out of crystalline materials. I mean, you can find things in nature that look just like all these built structures, but you don't see anything of that scale unless you look at an enormously tall tree. It's about the closest you get to the structures that we build today in our big cities.
Yeah. Okay. I think for me, I've got a lot of respect for Steiner. The first thing that I say, I've been asked this question before, and the first thing that I would say is that Steiner was a very modern man, and he completely believed in technology. And so, as he said, the first building that he designed was built of timber, but it just so happened that when that was burnt down, that the newest technology available in the world was concrete construction. And for Steiner, that offered opportunity for expressive freedom that timber hadn't. He could do it with timber, but it was much harder to do it with timber. It was a lot more work and a lot more removing material. And so you didn't have that ability to build a form and fill it with concrete, which was liquid, and then that to solidify into something that was permanent. But he was an incredible believer in technology, and he took that across many spheres of the things that he taught, not just architecture. The forms that he used were allowed and facilitated by that technology. And so he changed his design style dramatically from where it had been because the technology allowed it to do something different. And what he was able to do through his spiritual belief is he was able to really bring some of the archetypes of space and the effects they have on people spiritually into form. He created really a movement of architects who followed him who've done that. Right through to the present day. So there are still architects who work in that way and do that. There's one of the risks with Steiner's design and anthroposophical architecture is that people copy the forms and don't copy that same pioneering boldness. And so they're copying it, I would say, probably in a little bit of a dogmatic way, rather than the creative, free, expressive way that it was brought in the first place. And there's something occasionally a little bit stifling about the experience of those buildings. In terms of organic form and nature, the 21st century is very different, and we have architects like Zaha Hadid, Renzo Piano. There's a whole lot of architects out in the world. Carmen Pinos is another one in Spain, who are doing what is called in these days biomorphic architecture. So buildings that are completely made to mimic aspects of nature. Sometimes it's the materiality, so the skin of the building is performing in a particular way, the way that an animal skin might perform or a plant skin might perform. Sometimes it's through the shape of the building. So the shape of the building is responding to a form that's in nature. And so I think that it's probably more, so to answer your question very directly, it's probably more relevant now because our technology is allowing that freedom. I caution as well, because just because technology allows us to express ourselves with more freedom, if we're destroying the world we live in through increasing our use of complicated technologies, is that the sort of world we want to create for our children, our grandchildren? You know, they will look back at us and said, you had great fun playing with form and making these fascinating forms, and now look what you've left us. So you have to weigh up all of those things.
Well, look, thank you very much. That's a very satisfying and really thoughtful appraisal, and I thank you for it, because it mimics, or at least it's consistent with some of the views I've had about the way a lot of those ideas of Steiner have been taken as if they're recipes that you just have to keep repeating out of a book, whereas in fact it's the impetus of looking at new ways of doing things fit for the time or the circumstance that I think is the hallmark of that whole initiative. And if he were alive today, I agree with you, he would be using a whole lot of newly available opportunities in in ways where he would today be, I'm sure, very, very much more concerned with the source of the materials and their impact environmentally, something that didn't need to be thought about or questioned in his day. So look, thank you very much.
Sorry, did I miss something? Do we have any other questions?
Yes, Alvyn, it's Danielle here. Can I ask you about sort of archetypal forms that you use? I did a project about architecture, and I know a little about Greg Burgess. I interviewed him for it and understand from looking at his works that he has some typical forms that he often uses, like a sort of lemniscate form, and his roofs look a bit similar to yours in that they sort of come up to points that sort of really embrace space and go sort of outwards on an angle. And so I can see various similarities there. I'm wondering, did you sort of take some of the ideas from him and translate them, or have you developed some of your own archetypal forms?
I think the short answer to that is yes to both. I was very influenced by a landscape architect called Julie Mesnervy. She wrote a book called The Inward Garden and described a whole series of different archetypal spaces that most architecture and landscape just repeats those archetypal spaces in different ways. An example of some of them is the cave, where you're completely enclosed by space, the harbour, where you have a little bit of openness but a lot of shelter, the promontory, where you have a lot of openness and a little bit of shelter, the island or the ocean, where you're out in the middle of everything and you're very small. And so I was very influenced by the way she saw the different archetypal spaces, and particularly, but one of the most common terms that a client uses, I should say my clients use when they're describing their experience of being in their house or their building that's finished, is being held by it. And so I like to explore that, because that means something different for different people. For some people, being held by the house is really where the house actually reminds them who they are. For other people, it's where the house meets their needs in such an elegant way that it's almost like the house has anticipated their needs, but it's not. It's just the design has anticipated their needs. Is that what you meant, Anya?
Yeah, it sounds like, well, yeah, I was wondering if there are particular sort of actual images that you might use as well, but it sounds like you sort of perhaps use them more abstractly.
Yeah. One of the, why you'll see, I mean, I spent 8 years working for Greg, and so the materials that they used in Greg's office, or that we all used, we were all researching sustainable materials all the time. And so some of my time there, it was almost like I was the holder of the knowledge and the research on the most sustainable materials. That was passed down to me from someone, and then I passed it down to someone else and did that. So you take something like a material, and we all use a lot of timber, because timber's, it sequesters carbon, it's natural, it connects people with nature. It's got a low embodied energy. There's all these wonderful benefits with using timber in buildings. You'll see that in some of Greg's buildings and in some of mine, the same timber will be used. And that's because we're working from the same values and we've come to the same conclusion. Is plantation silvertop ash, a native hardwood grown in Gippsland, more sustainable than Cypress macrocarpa that's salvaged from a farm and milled? Cypress macrocarpa might not last as long on the wall, but there's no forestry or obliterating forestry involved in that process, or not for the last 100 years. And once we start to use those materials, the same detailing and finishes need to be used to make those materials last the maximum amount of time and look as good as they do. I typically like to design buildings with eaves. If you walk around suburban Melbourne these days, it's only the houses that are over 50 years old that seem to have eaves anymore. It's just so simple to shade the sun from north-facing windows and stop rain running down walls and rotting them, making them damp. But Melbourne architects have decided that's not cool or stylish, and that we don't do eaves anymore. And a number of clients I've had to argue with over the years and say, I think you really should have eaves. You'll be much happier. You'll have to maintain the building less. You'll have a better energy performance. And so if you're using particular materials, then the forms that those materials are suited to are going to come out of those forms. The texture and the style of the material governs what you do with it.
All right, thank you.
Alvyn, I have a question. Where we live in Heidelberg West, and I'm sure this is all over the place, but there are so many houses being demolished and very quickly made, very square houses being built, which I feel quite depressed when I walk around and see all these houses coming up. Do you feel like there's any hope in terms of, if that's the next generation of houses that are coming up everywhere, it seems, that there's any hope of transforming them into something? I kind of just feel like maybe we need to grow plants all over them, or like if there's some way of making them more human or more, that sense of connection, because they feel so disconnected.
Yeah, it's a good question, Rach. The time heals a lot of things. The famous criticism of an architect is that we're going to have to plant ivy. What's happened, it's not just Melbourne, it's happening all over the world, the densification of suburban areas. And so what that's showing is that people's values have changed across the world, or the priority of their values has changed. It's happening in countries that are a lot wealthier, where people aren't growing their own food and providing their own needs in quite the same way. And so that they can invest in different things, and their living environment reflects the fact they don't need to find energy, they don't need to find food, they don't need to find water. I believe that a lot of those developments that are happening are very fragile places. And we saw a talk a few years ago by Sajid Das, and he said that most modern humans are 6 meals away from anarchy, in that because we live in such unsustainable and structurally unsustainable, vulnerable situations, that if the supermarket stopped selling food or the tap stopped running water, that would be a very short period of time before we couldn't live in that environment anymore. We'd need to go and we'd probably in Australia go and knock on the government's door and say, help, what have you done? Rural people don't live like that. Rural people have historically managed their own needs and been quite ruthlessly off-grid, even when there's been other alternatives offered. And the So where you are in West Heidelberg, the suburban structure of West Heidelberg was set up so that people could have chickens and grow food and have fruit trees in their backyards. And that's what's being changed at the moment. It's a grand, you call it a grand experiment in whether this modern idea or this contemporary idea of everything can come from somewhere else is actually going to work. You don't have to study history too far to see that it's never really worked. It's always failed. And David Holmgren in Retrosuburbia actually describes 2020, isn't it? Or 2019, 2020 as the time when it starts to fail in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen with those buildings in particular.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, what I believe and what I've seen happen in the communities in the US and in Spain that have been abandoned is that those materials get repurposed into other things that people need to sustain them.
Yeah.
So the tiles, the bricks, metal, the concrete,
polystyrene, yeah,
the polystyrene, the fencing. No, they become the place where resources can be taken from.
Yeah.
Detroit is a fantastic example of that. There's parts of Detroit that have now got one house for every 10 houses, and the rest of the land's been taken up as vegetable gardens. All those houses didn't just get burnt and destroyed, they got picked apart piece by piece where everything of value was taken from them.
Yeah. We've taken a few bricks and bits of wood from our timber from those demolitions. Yeah. But it's amazing how much goes in the skip as well.
It is incredible how much goes in the skip.
Yeah. Seeing beautiful hardwood just getting crushed with the excavator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's become, even 10 years ago, you could go to a wrecker's yard around Melbourne, around Victoria, and there was just piles and piles of things taken out of houses that were valuable. Now it costs $25,000 or $30,000 to demolish a house that way, compared to a few thousand to crush it up and put it in a skip.
Wow.
And so for most of those developments, it's an economic decision to just put an excavator through it, punch it into little bits and put it in the skip.
Wow, it's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've got quite a tricky situation, because with the economic system that we've got in place, call it capitalism, but it's a bit more complex than that. Where we get our materials from is quite important. So the part of the world that lives within the resources of one world tends to use free materials, which might be earth or stone or rock or timber, with no cost attached to them, virtually. And then they have enormous amounts of labour, which is the people's own labour on the whole, which are required to transform those free materials into something that gives you shelter. We've got entirely the opposite model, where we have giant companies with CEOs earning billions of dollars and shareholders that completely inconsistent with their other values expect the company to do things to the environment and social justice, to make money for them. And we're on a mission in Australia to reduce labour on building sites, because our builders cost 80, 90, 120 for an electrician an hour. Like the rates of pay are so high that we can't afford to pay other people to do our labour.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have the advantage of slave labour like some other parts of the world, or the disadvantage of slave labour, whichever way you look at it. In Los Angeles, you can drive a truck down to Mexican side of town and fill it up with workers for the day who work for a few dollars. That's a good thing that Australia didn't go that way, but we've still tied ourselves into the corporate structure of where materials come from.
Yeah.
Alvyn, I was wondering if you might want to give us a glimpse of what you're inspired to do with the next 20 years of your career.
Thanks, Raku. I think, I've been asked this question recently, and the honest answer is I don't want to get bigger, and I don't want to do bigger buildings. I'd like to get better at what we do. I'd like to refine those systems more. I'd like to, again, like Tolstoy has said, look at how I live and where I'm hypocritical about consumption of material and resources, and sort of turn that back on myself and the way that I manage a business and the way that my family live and those other things. I'd also strongly believe that what we're seeing with COVID is the first of many shocks to a world that we've become very relaxed about. And the big shock that's coming for us is the instability we've created with climate. And that really we, all of us, not just architects, but we all need to be very focused on our trajectory, where we're heading with that, and the way that our environment is going to change, but also the way we don't know how it's going to change. It means that design thinking is going to become very important, and design thinking is very, very different to traditions. It's very, very different to being able to look at a weather forecast and say, no, I know the 100-year average is this much rain or this much sun. It's actually being able to respond to things in a much more immediate way, and be able to understand the relationships between things in a much stronger way. I personally would like to know a lot more about Indigenous architecture. I think that there's a whole raft of knowledge that's been trampled over and thrown away, possibly lost. And I'd like to know a lot more about that, particularly the Indigenous architecture that relates to this part of Australia. If you look at Sturt's diaries, Sturt and other early explorers have said that the Indigenous people lived in a much more comfortable and healthy way than the first settlers of Australia. Their houses were better, they weren't as sick. The architecture was actually a better form of architecture than the settlers brought with them from Europe. And so the settlers imitated it, and that's why you get bark huts and things like that.
Alvyn, could I ask you to give us something to just hold on to? I find the climate conversation extraordinarily unsettling, and perhaps adaptability is something that architecture and other ways of building our lives is going to be a predominant value that we're all going to have to adopt, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, what's a really important thing to hold on to is that you can be the author of your own future, the author of your own story. Values-based architecture is very much about imagining a world that you would want to live in, that's worth living in, and the qualities of that world, and then actually putting the pathway to go there together. And you don't have to be a property owner to do that. You don't have to have a house. You don't need things to do that. It's a lot about knowing yourself.
And keeping company with the right community, I guess, to strengthen your values. Thanks, Alvyn. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, that seems like a pretty powerful note to finish on, I think. Unless there's anyone with the question that they've just been kind of bubbling away with.
I usually want to hear something from the quiet people.
Yeah.
Is there any quiet person who's been waiting for a chance?
Well, we've been quiet. And that's because I'm not sure, but I didn't want to spill the beans and spoil this amazing talk that Alvyn has given and told us about the way that Alvyn interprets architecture and his, I guess, Alvyn's role in being a listener and an initiator and a guide. And we can talk from first-hand experience because we've engaged Alvyn to help us imagine and dig deeper into what we see as our future. And Alvyn's taken us on an amazing journey so far, and there's a long way probably still to go. But yeah, I can shout out to the value of Alvyn's approach and the way that it helps one to see one's own reflection and really think about what it is that drives the decisions that we make. And when you're thinking about retrofitting or renovating or modifying your house so the mold doesn't grow on the walls, just having it being held by the process that Alvyn has brings so much humanity and so much sense of context to such an incredibly difficult process, and a process that can break marriages, can break relationships, and can break people when they're trying to think of how to rebuild the house you're in, or how to rebuild the relationship that you have to the house you're in. So we're very grateful for Alvyn's values-based approach.
And we learned so much tonight too. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I get you to share a question? Is there something that you learned about yourselves that you might not have been aware of at the start of that design process?
That's a good question.
There's heaps that I've learned about myself and that we've learned about ourselves, I think, Alvyn, but it's very hard to put that into its essence. I think the whole journey that you've taken us down, which is different to the way other architects that we have talked with or engaged in other capacities have taken us down. It's made us step outside of ourselves and see this place see the places that we live in and the places that we value in a different light, and that sees ourselves in a different light.
I think also for me it has highlighted how I feel quite in between different values, a little bit like torn. But I come from Norway, where we live in a very different climate, and I actually today when you were talking, I thought, wow, that's what it is. I'm holding on to some of my comforts or some of the way that I'm used to what shelter means for me from where I come from. And I try so much to hold on to that here, which actually I need to really question that again. So yeah, I'm constantly learning. It's wonderful.
Mm.
Hello, Alvyn. I'm a quiet person, possibly not with a question, but we'll say something as responding to being a quiet person. So I live in public housing in Hobart, in a very concrete area, awful sound, very, everyone in that situation is living with very compromised social situations and lots of difficulties and very disconnected from each other. And I felt quite overwhelmed and powerless in that situation, very powerless, and tried to engage with government around it and kind of trying to engage with the structures above about what's going on, and come to this kind of thing of feeling that that's what I feel like with capitalism, very disempowered, because I feel like the structures above I have no way of engaging with, and have then come back around to this model of very much like that Tolstoy statement that it's actually internally inside in which I will break that capitalist structure in which I live. And yeah, just had a conversation with Raku and Claire here about a sense of self and a sense of uniqueness and our own unique identity. And so finding that within ourselves and then making, as you say, a pathway to the future from that unique identity actually blows apart a lot of the ideas that are embedded in capitalism. So I really like that way of breaking apart a much larger structure of which I feel powerless in by working internally inside myself. So yeah, I think, and that I really love that idea of the pathway towards the future. So finding my pathway towards a future which may not be about home ownership, in fact, and just imagining what that world is. So yeah, so I wanted to say thank you. And yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Alvyn, I just have a little comment to add to that. Having been working really intensively with public housing estate residents in the last, and feeling like there's a lot of quietly radical action that happens within the communities there. So I think, I don't know your name who spoke previously, but you talk about feeling disempowered, and I've noticed that a lot of the people that live there have been feeling really let down by the government, but empowered within their own communities. So there's been some really phenomenal in the way that people have banded together. And that totally reflects their values. And coming from countries where community is really strong, yeah, that's what I've seen a lot happening, and that's been really inspiring for me, actually. Really, really hopeful.
And you've been doing some amazing work just even in the last few weeks, Nikki, with those communities, and you know, the clash of their culture and the specific values in their culture and our culture, and then this pandemic that's gone and sort of thrown a big, you know, gash all the way through all of those things that we think that we know about too. Yeah, it's been enormous. And I'm just deeply interested to see how there's been a huge fracture, I would say, of trust in the government systems that are supposed to support the people that are there. And what's become really clear is that the people have the power and the governments are redundant, because it was the people on the ground, the communities on the ground, that got the support in there where it was needed. So I'm very hopeful that it signals a really significant shift in the way that these communities now move forward and continue to support each other through, you know, however we survive the rest of this pandemic and what emerges from this time as well. Yeah. Thanks, Alvyn. It's been a really wonderful talk. Anything else from any of those other quiet people? So what do you think, Rachel? Shall we finish up there?
Yeah. Yeah, often we just get everyone to go and say what they got from the talk, but there are quite a few people to do that. But maybe if people just want to share, maybe people who haven't shared, just what they are going to take away from this talk. And if you've shared too.
Hi, I'm Maria. I was interested in this particularly because I'm part of a group that is exploring building together in the new Belfield village. And we're looking at possibly co-housing, but it's very different to the normal co-housing model, because normally you start with your community and then you find where you want to live and how you want to live and work together. Whereas the land is there already, and whilst it's not our ideal of being urban and all that goes with that, I think there's a lot of potential. There's an urban farm developing on the school next door. There are a number of things that are pluses. And tonight was really interesting because it made me realise that, the group of people who are interested, we need to wait for nearly 12 months before we know whether we can go ahead, whether council gives us the okay to go ahead. In the meantime, we can't meet each other because of COVID. We can only meet on Zoom.
Mm.
So that's an incredible challenge to work out how to get to know each other and how to explore our values in that time. So I think tonight's been really useful to me because we've been asked for what things are important to us. But I think, Alvyn, what I got from you particularly was it's about individuals' priorities that we're going to need to sort out. So there's lots of inspiration and food for thought from tonight, and I hope I'll be able to explore this further. I noticed this is being recorded tonight. Anyway, I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to let people know, we will send out a link to everybody, so a lot of people who couldn't make it wanted to hear.
Oh, great. Thank you.
No worries.
Hi, Alvyn. I'm Evie. I'm Nikki's friend and also her neighbor. So, and Raku. I just wanted to thank you for the inspiration. I think it's really good to think about actually what shelter actually means. And I remember when I moved to Australia 5 years ago, I was really shocked by the fences everywhere, fences that people build. And I've seen now projects where people actually take away their fences and build tables, which I really find inspiring and hopeful. And I would love to, I would love to get rid of fences. And I think a value-based approach to architecture is just so crucial and gives me a lot of hope. So I just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a suburb that I near here where I go take my son for a bike ride around, and during the lockdown, everybody in that area, in some of the streets, was sitting out in a deck chair in their driveway, talking, and the kids were riding scooters around on the street. There was no cars driving, so everyone was there every evening, actually, you know, all apart from each other, but all together. And a totally different world to the one that most of us are familiar with.
Absolutely. Yeah, driveway parties are the new thing. Thank you.
I think you were muted there, Rach, when you were speaking.
Sorry. Any final comments or?
Yeah, I'll just say I've already just spoken, but I'll say again. I've got out of Alvyn's talk today a renewed motivation to go back to that initial documentation that Alvyn helped us produce, which was of our prioritised set of values. And I realise now that I haven't gone back to those for a long time to have a look. And when we are deep in a spreadsheet trying to nut out tiny little details and work out, oh, should we go with that material or this material, and where is that sourced from, and what's the embodied energy in that, and what does that mean to us?
And let's just take these taps.
Oh, we'll just choose those bloody taps. And when we've got to that level, then tonight has reminded us of the value of what it is that we started this project with, and how that can guide us, hopefully, in all of it.
And it's like a muscle, you develop it in the process.
That's what we need. Yeah. So that's given us renewed vigor.
Thanks, Alvyn. I'm Anastasia. Hi. That was really great. I don't have a project or anything interesting, but I am interested to do a bit of self-reflection and go back and actually question what are my values. I sort of think I have an idea of what they are, but whether I could actually, you know, put them down as points or clearly state what they are, I'm not sure. So this has given me a good foundation, I guess, to go back and question those things. So thanks.
Thank you.
Are you reaching to unmute yourself, Raku? No. Cool. Well, I reckon that's a beat. And yeah, I would love to say a massive thank you to you, Alvyn, for your time and sharing your expertise and your wisdom. I think you're really not just an incredible architect, but a really wise one. And I've been honoured to be in lots of spaces that you and Pia have created together. And I definitely feel held when I'm in your spaces, and also moved by the beauty of what you guys create. And I know it's really inspiring for Ollie and me. And I definitely feel the importance of space and what that creates for us as humans and our psyches and our spirituality. So thank you for all that you do. And I loved hearing where you want to go in the next 20 years. And thank you everyone for coming on a Friday evening from all over Australia. And yeah, it's just such a pleasure to have this opportunity to get together during these crazy times, to see your faces, to be inspired of what is possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you for organising all of this too.
We can give
Thanks
Alvyn
very much, Alvyn.
a big clap. Thanks, Alvyn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
And Rachel, yeah, thanks for organising.
Such a pleasure. Cool. Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Is Avaz okay, Eloise? Oh, she's gone.